Alright guys, welcome back. Yesterday we concluded our discussion talking about modern evolutionary theory. We closed talking about paleontology, and today we're going to pick right back up talking about the basic tenets of evolution. And as you see here, we have some of the major components of the modern evolutionary theory. We see genetics, that is a very important aspect. We see natural selection, homology, which we will discuss today, comparative anatomy, embryology, and behavioral ecology. And here we see the basic tenets of evolution. First, we see that genetics is the foundation for observed variation necessary for biological evolution. Genetics is where evolutionists search to visibly support their beliefs. Biological evolution requires visible evidence, and genetics would be the means by which the evolutionists find that support for their theory. Next, you see that natural selection is one of the main drivers of biological evolution and depends on genetic diversity. Natural selection is what causes changes in a species, and these changes are dependent upon genetic diversity. Genetic diversity, as we talked about yesterday, is simply the amount of change that is possible based upon the genes found within a species. And so that is a very important thing for you to remember as we continue our discussion here. We also see that biological evolution is a result of small, gradual changes over long periods of time. It takes millions of years for biological evolution to occur on a large scale. If you would ask an evolutionist, that's what he would say. He would say that biological evolution, as it says here, small, gradual changes over long periods of time. An evolutionist would say millions of years for, the monkey to the man. That biological evolution would take a long time. We see here that biological evolution relies on fossil evidence to reconstruct the tree of life from simple to complex organisms. So evolutionists rely heavily on fossil evidence and the bones that they can find within the rock in the earth. The fossil record is an integral part of evolution that helps prove evolutionary thought, at least in the mind of evolutionists. We see here this term homologous structures. These are organs that are similar in different organisms and are thought to show evolutionary relationships. I have a picture for you here. This can be found in your book, at least one similar to it. This is an example of, these are examples of homologous structures. As you can see, we have like the arm, the paw, the fin, and the wing of a bat. And these are all similar structures, but these are all different organisms and different species. But they all have a similar structure, and so that is thought by evolutionists to show evolutionary relationships. Next, we see some different aspects of evolution here. We have the first one, homology. Homology is the state of having similar characteristics, whether genetic, skeletal, or some other ones. Homology that would be the state of having the similar structures as we saw in that last example. Next, we have analogous structures. Analogous structures are similar in function, but are present in living things from different evolutionary lines. This would be an example. This would be bird and insect wings. They're both wings, but they have the same function. They help the organism fly, but birds and insects are from different evolutionary lines and species. Next, we see Hox genes. Hox genes regulate the development of anatomical structures in organisms, and Hox genes specify anatomical position. All that means is that these Hox genes make sure that the head goes where the head goes, the legs go where the legs go, and they ensure that the development of anatomical structures occurs in the right way. So those are very important and are used in evolutionary thought. Here we see embryology. Embryology deals with genetic production, fertilization, and the development of embryos. This is specifically deals with gamete production, or the sex cells of the parents that that then are fertilized and then result in the development of embryos. And so this is a very important aspect and study of evolution as well. Next, we see comparative anatomy. This is the study of similarities and differences in the anatomy of different species. In evolution, this is used to determine if different species descended from a common ancestor. In the picture of the arm, the paw, the fin, and the wing, scientists would study those homologous structures to determine if any of the, if a man, if the whale, the bat, the cat, if any of them came from a common ancestor. This is comparative anatomy. Next, we see biogeography here. Biogeography provides information about how and where a species may have evolved. Fossils provide evidence of long-term evolutionary changes, which documents past existence of extinct species. And then next, we see behavioral ecology. Behavioral ecology is the study of behavioral interaction within a population. It observes the effect of competition and cooperation on evolutionary fitness of a species. So this is how fit something is based upon the competition and cooperation of the other organisms in that environment. Moving on, we see that attempts to reinterpret Genesis 1 shake the very foundations of biblical Christianity. As you should know, Genesis is the first book of the Bible, and if an evolutionist could disrupt or cause uncertainty concerning the book of Genesis, he could actually discredit the entire Bible. Genesis also deals with the origin of life, creation, which is a major aspect of the evolutionary theory. Not creation, but the origin of life. They would love to discredit that. And so you need to keep this in mind as we continue discussing this and as we move on to discussing the creation worldview. Here we see the Bible and evolution. This is an attempt to merge the Bible and evolution together. And here we see what is known as the analogical day view. This views the 6 days of creation and says that they are analogies. This is an evolutionary theory. The Bible teaches that the 6 days of creation are literal, and so this view teaches that the days are just analogies so that we can relate to them. They are actually much longer periods of time and are not meant to be taken literally. Next, we see the framework view. The order in Genesis 1 is topical. It's not chronological, or it's not meant to be an actual representation of the actual time that it took. They would say that Genesis 1 is just it's just topical. It just talks about creation and is not meant to be taken literally as well. And it's similar to the analogical day view. And both of these views assert that Genesis 1 is not historical, but rather it's more, it's just not historical. It's not to be taken as fact or literally. Next, we see that progressive creationism, and we see theistic evolution. But starting with progressive creationism, this teaches that the days of Genesis 1 are long periods, oftentimes interpreted to be millions of years. And it says that God intervened many times to directly create each species. So this means that God would create certain things in one of the days, and then after a long time he would insert another time of creation, which may be interpreted as one of the other days of creation, and he would directly create a new species. Next, we see theistic evolutionism. God initially created, but evolutionary science correctly explains the development of life. This is the idea that God created the world and maybe a few animals, but evolutionary science, or evolution, is actually the means by which God used to develop the plants and animals that we have today. So it's basically God using the vehicle of evolution to give the development of life on Earth. I actually went to school with a girl who believed this in Bible college, and so this is something that is very, very prevalent in our society today, especially in churches, and some of the people you may know may believe this. Next, we see the great problem is death before sin. The Bible teaches that death and suffering came as a result of sin. But evolution teaches that death has just always existed, and not survival of the fittest and all that stuff. And this is contradictory to the biblical teaching. Biblical and evolutionary perspectives of death are not compatible because they teach completely different things. Next, we see the story of evolution. This teaches that it talks about the early Earth. It actually began everything with the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the universe was, it was unknowably small, an infinitesimal dot, and then all of a sudden, out of nothing, this explosion happened, and it sparked this expansion of the universe. The universe began to expand from a small, unknowably small dot into the size that it is today, and it sparked time and space to begin, and it then moved on to this chemical evolution that we see. That was these simple inorganic molecules reacted to form complex organic molecules. So eventually stars would form, and they would cause these reactions, and then eventually the Earth was formed, and then eventually single-cell organisms were formed, and these processes led to the formation of amino acids, proteins, RNA, and DNA, and ultimately complex life that we have today. The first simple creatures that we see here were probably anaerobic single-cell bacteria capable of living in harsh conditions such as the molten and the super hot atmosphere and the crust that would have been present on the Earth as it was forming, and so there are some types of organisms that live on Earth today that are capable of living in extreme conditions. They're called extremophiles, and this is just what they believed evolved into complex life. Next, we see that more and more complex organisms began to come about as a result of biological evolution. This is molecular evolution, as we see here. The slow, gradual changes in proteins and genetic material resulted in, again, more and more complex organisms. And then we see next the molecular clock. This is a technique that determines the rate of change in specific genes and proteins in a living organism. And this is just how you measure the rate of change in a species and in the different types of genes and proteins. It's how you measure the rate of change that occurs during the evolutionary process. Well, guys, that is all for today. Thanks for listening. We will continue. We have a few more notes to listen to, and then we will be done. We will begin talking about creation and that worldview very soon.